Hello and welcome to Defining and Sustaining a Values-Based Culture, Behaviors that Reinforce. In today's session, we'll learn how to define expected behaviors that reinforce core values, articulate behaviors that contradict core values, and determine required changes in the midst of a crisis. With us today is Steve Wiley. Steve is president of CEEK and author of Navigate Chaos, a #1 bestseller on Amazon, who is on a personal mission to rid the world of zombies in the workforce. So let's please welcome Steve. Steve, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go off video and microphone, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mel. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us again this week. If you missed last week, I laid out the foundation of establishing an intentional values-based culture. As Mel said, we give you access. If you missed it, you can go back and watch a video of that. In that session, I made the case that hypocrisy is the #1 thing that can destroy engagement in organizations. And we define that hypocrisy as a state where your professed values differ from your demonstrated behaviors. I also stated that typically is not something that's intentional or malicious, but rather it happens because we fail to define the standards by which we measure our values. And so today is all about that. It's about defining those standards in terms of the behaviors that reinforce the values of the organization. So before we jump into this, I'm going to pose a question to you. I'd like you to pull up your chat and just give us some examples of where is one example of unintended hypocrisy at home or at work or anywhere. Last week I laid out a couple of examples. Perhaps you profess a culture of collaboration in your organization. You walk down and all the doors are closed. Or maybe you profess a culture of accountability and respect, but no one shows up in a timely manner to meetings, things of that nature. So to the degree you're willing to share, just encourage people to give us an example of unintended hypocrisy at home or at work. And Mel, while they're doing that, I was going to ask you a question. Can you see my video? Because I can't see my own video.
Yes, Steve, I see your video.
Okay. That's good to know. Usually I've got my own video up, but I don't see that there. But all right, thank you, LaShonda. Staff show up for meetings on their own time or do not show up at all. Exactly, I see this as a pervasive problem in organizations. Phones for kids not allowed at the dinner table. I love it. Yeah, I think that's there could be any number of values, Chris, that kind of relate to that in the home. Eat your veggies. Yes, Kristen, I know we all deal with that. Healthy eating, but drinking Cokes. So we value health. We value just eating the right things. Encouraging work-life balance, but making an employee feel guilty. Jay, I think you're hitting on one. You guys can keep these coming in, but I want to share my own story, my own example. About 10 years ago, I was placed in charge of an account in the business that I worked for. It was a company of about 7,000 people. The account I led had about 200 people in it. And I professed work-life balance. I professed balance as a core value that we were going to demonstrate, that we were going to prove that a healthy, balanced workforce was good for business. Well, I demonstrated some hypocrisy. You see, at the time, I had no balance. Maybe that was part of the reason why I wanted to make it a core value. As a new account manager, I was double, triple booked throughout the week. And the only time I had to really get my work done was actually on the nights or weekends. So in my own pursuit of balance, I established my own routine. I have a daughter who is a competitive gymnast, and she had practice every Saturday morning from 8 till 12. And I told my wife, I said, you sleep in. I'll get some exercise, get some rest. I will wake up every Saturday morning, take our daughter to the gym. I'll work in the lobby. I'll catch up on all the emails from the week. I'll get my work done. And this will be helpful. The rest of the weekend can be my own time. Now, at the time, that gym lobby didn't have Wi-Fi access. And so the only problem was every time I would go home, I would plug my computer back in, it would automatically connect to the Wi-Fi, and a flurry of emails would go out from the boss about 1 o'clock every Saturday. Now, this was good for me. I could focus the rest of my weekend on faith, on family. It was really helpful in restoring my own value, or my own value related to balance. However, one of my program managers eventually came to me a couple months later and said, Steve, your actions are setting the expectation that weekend work is required. People were getting all these messages from me on the weekend and feeling like, oh my God, here he comes again. It was completely unintentional, and it was easily resolved. There were certain things that I could do that just made it clear that this is not the expectation. Many things that we put in place. But that's just an example, one example. I mean, this happens all the time. And so today, again, it's all about how do we bring clarity to those values and enable us to have the conversation like my program manager was able to have with me. So let me jump back to the agenda that Mel has already shared with us. But today, we're really going to dive into this. How do you define those standards in terms of those behaviors? And at the same time, what are those behaviors that need to stop? And again, we do this, we give you an approach without judgment. And then finally, I just want to challenge you in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of a serious disruption to our work environment, it's always a good time to revisit those values, revisit those behaviors, and what do you do in the midst of all that? So again, last week I introduced, we follow this GEAR methodology, and today is really about gathering. It's about setting some context, giving you some information that you can apply in bite-sized chunks here. We're doing 7 of these episodes. We'll give you the landing page that you can go out and expand upon the content that's provided today. There's additional material that you can look at. And in that material, there's also, as you hopefully saw last week, an activity sheet, something that you can take and you can apply this, and you can do this within your family, within your team, within your organization, at whatever level you sit. You can do this today and then receive, if you want support, if you need independent facilitation, or if you simply have questions and want to email me and ask me any questions, we're here for you. So with that, let me just give a reminder. Last week, we introduced this notion of the foundation of intentional culture. We started with the mission and vision, and I challenged you. I said, I don't care. You know, most of the time we just adopt and embrace whatever that mission and vision of the organization is that we support, which is good. But at the same time, if you run a team, you lead a family, why not have your own mission? Let's be clear about what is our compelling purpose. And then episode 1, we really focus on that foundation. What are those core values? And again, most organizations may have defined core values, but we challenge you to look at them from a different perspective and say, how do I apply those core values within the team that I lead? As well as how do you categorize those values? And again, you can look back at the last episode, but we talked about right to play versus core and aspirational values. And right to play, those things that everyone should just adhere to, versus those core and aspirational values, those values that will differentiate your team or your organization relative to your peers, relative to your competitors. Well, today we're really going to talk about how do you minimize that degree of hypocrisy. And I choose the word minimize because I want us all to recognize this exists because people are people. We all have different perspectives, but this is just trying to bring clarity to the standards by which we assess and implement our values. And so that's what we'll focus on today. Hope you'll join us next week because whereas behaviors can still be somewhat subjective, rituals will get into a very prescribed application of your values and behaviors. And all of that together forms the foundation of what we call intentional values-based culture. And again, in the remaining sessions, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we're going to talk about how do you implement it. Once you have this foundation of intentional culture, how do you hire for the right fit? How do you train, communicate, and coach it into your organization? And then finally, how do you measure it to show that it's having an impact on both engagement and business results that you desire? So let me go back to the example that I shared with you. So as an account manager in an organization, leading a team of a couple hundred people, I kind of stumbled upon this notion of intentional culture. And it was a reactionary type development approach. I already confessed to you kind of my situation where I got called out for, and hypocrisy is a tough word. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but it was an inconsistency in what I was professing in the organization was a value. And so there were a number of examples of those, and we started to write collectively as a group some statements, some mantras, some behaviors that became clarification. And I want to share a few of those, and did this kind of in a reactionary mode. The first one, after my program manager said, Steve, you're not practicing or demonstrating what you preach. We kind of came up with this metaphor. We called it honor the space between the notes. Heard this from a speaker that I had brought in to speak on the subject of balance. But it's a metaphor for music. If anyone here plays the piano or plays an instrument, I can teach you how to play the right notes. But if you don't get the space between the notes, if you don't get the pauses right, it's just noise. And so we applied that at work, and we applied that relative to our value of balance. What are the spaces between the notes? What is that rest between the notes? Honor that space between the notes. And this became something that we talked about as an organization, what it means to honor the space between the notes when someone goes on vacation. What does it mean to honor the space between the notes when someone has dinner plans with the family or needs to go see their child perform? What does that look like to honor that space between the notes? And this became a behavior that reinforced the value. And what it meant was that the night and weekend work was the exception to the rule. And when I'm sending a flurry of emails out on the weekend, I'm either putting those on hold until Monday, or I'm putting in big bold letters, this is not urgent, or something. There are just different ways that we start to practice that behavior. Give you some other examples. I think this was one of the most pervasive things I see in organizations, and we certainly experienced it. I can't tell you how many times as an account manager, someone would come out of an annual review and request a secondary or higher level review from me or someone else and say, my boss just sat me down and gave me all this feedback, and this is the first time I have ever heard any of this. And that wasn't consistent with our value of respect. Our company had an acronym for our 5 values: raise, respect, accountability, integrity, service, and excellence. This was not being respectful. So we made a behavior statement. Again, we were kind of stumbling upon this from a retroactive standpoint, responding to the hypocrisies that we saw organizationally. Didn't judge it. We just took the con, as you see here. We took the con. We steered the ship. We owned it. We defined some behavior statements. So we implemented different ways that we would be productive and provide proactive feedback early and often. Another one that we developed was this notion of don't sacrifice the important for the perpetual urgent. So many times I just heard people, and I acknowledged it myself, that I'm in this constant state of reactive chaos, responding to the perpetual urgent. And so we said, yeah, I'm trying to encourage people to be strategic, to be creative, to think. But people just didn't have the time. So we made this a behavior statement, and we said, okay, what can we do to enable this? And one of the things I did was I simply blocked off 2 hours on my calendar every week that I called, this is for the strategic and important. And I literally just put it, we embrace something now today at CEEK that we call analog time. It's the same approach. We shut down technology and we focus on the strategic and important. That may be our own health and well-being. So we embraced this as a behavior statement. We adopted another one. We called it do for one what you wish you could do for many. We embrace this today at CEEK as well, but this was largely came out of response to, as an account manager, like many of my peers in the organization, we were allocated a budget for training and development. Some of my peers would just take that budget and say, okay, I've got 200 people in the account, and I'm just going to equally allocate that and encourage people to take that. That was not an effective way for training in our organization, and I wanted to make it clear. And so we said, we're not going to not do something because we don't have enough to serve everyone. And so this was kind of making it clear that setting expectations in an organization on how we delivered training and things of that nature. Last one here, last example, and we had a dozen of these statements that we came up with was wow your client by meeting their unspoken needs. So we had a core value about excellence. And I had been observing in our account that we were getting client survey feedback and they were like, yeah, you're good. Big deal. I mean, it wasn't anything that was setting us apart. And so we crafted this as a behavior statement and challenged our teams to go above and beyond to think, what is it that we can deliver to our clients that they don't even know they need? And maybe they do, but it's just going above and beyond. And we came up with so many different examples of how to be creative where our clients said, wow, and we watched survey results improve. And so we stumbled upon this, and I will tell you in this account, we grew. We nearly doubled in size within a 7-year period. When the company did an engagement survey, we had among the highest engagement scores in the organization, the lowest turnover. And this was kind of in a reactionary mode. So the challenge I have to all of you is, how do you get proactive about this? And this brings us back to our methodology for developing intentional culture. And so again, you'll have an activity sheet that you have access to, but you can do this today. When we do this, we facilitate sessions. If I'm in person, I'll have green sticky pad notes and red sticky pad notes, and we'll put the values on the wall and we'll just brainstorm and say, write down behaviors that reinforce this value and those that need to stop. Put the stop on the red ones, the ones reinforced on the green pad. It may be easier to do this remotely now. You can use survey tools, Poll Everywhere, SurveyMonkey, things of that nature. You can easily solicit the inputs. Ask them to email, ask your team to email the behaviors, but have a couple meetings about it. If you want support, we can help you with that. Give them some guidance, and you don't have to take notes here. This is on our activity sheet, but give them some guidance about coming up with these behavior statements. Start with an action verb. Make it clear. Try to keep them. I recommend 15 words or less. We try to make them concise. Then step 3 here, we'll take all these inputs and we start to group and refine just like we did with the values. Similar behavior statements. Ask for some literary license where you can make some modifications to language and go back to the group and say, okay, here's the consolidated list of behaviors for each of the values that we're going to vote on. And then you simply ask people to vote on them. Vote on the top 3 relative to each value that you can say 2 things. You can say, this will have an impact on our organization. This will help differentiate our organization. And 2, I'm willing to adhere to it. You don't want to adopt and embrace behaviors that people say, no, I'm not going to do that. So simply vote on them. And then you can come up with your set of behaviors, write a description for each of those. I can show you an example. Again, we practice what we preach. So here you see, this is a little insight into something we call our credo card. We'll talk about that under the communication session. At the top, you see our right to play values, our 5 whys of leadership, we call them. But it's really the passion, integrity, and creativity. I mentioned that last week. We like to say, engage your passion, integrity, and creativity. It's the creative application of a passion sustained with integrity that creates an epic story, an epic narrative. And so we've defined 4 behavior statements that reinforce each of those with a summary statement. Under passion, we say define ourselves by why, not what. If you ask me, what do? I could tell you I'm a management consultant. People ask me, what do? I say, I rid the world of zombies in the workforce. That's what I'm passionate about. That gives you a little more insight. That really drives what we do. Integrity, we talked about last week. Some might say that's a right to play value. We have a much broader, different perspective on integrity. This notion of honor your wholeness is all about healthy balance, and it impacts everything we do, from the policies, from our leave policy to just how we treat each other, to our analog time that I mentioned earlier. Bottom line, we value people over profit. And creativity, believe it before we see it, tell a story. These are things that really demonstrate and set us apart in our how we serve our clients and colleagues. About 5 weeks ago, we had a brainstorming session where we wanted to put on a webinar series that could help people during this time we didn't have this prepared, but we believed it before we saw it. We have our methodology, but we said, all right, let's schedule it. Let's make it happen. So here we are, Seek a Better Way. Here's another example of that we did for a federal client where we helped facilitate them through this process. You can see their core values and the behavior statements that they came up with. And I would challenge you, you can look at these and think about the potential hypocrisy that could exist in an organization. So under collaboration, someone may say to you, yeah, I meet with my team every day or every week, I'm collaborating. But really the standard isn't, are you meeting with them? The standard is are these effective meetings? Do you have an agenda? Do you have an objective? Do you have a call to action at the end of it? Same thing for leadership. You don't see in their behaviors related to leadership, you don't see things about setting a vision or inspiring. This gives you insight into what leadership means to this organization. It's about delegation. It's about accountability. It's about prioritization. That's how they demonstrate leadership. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these for the sake of time, but I shared the example with my family last week, and I want you to know that, you know, I mentioned we defined as a family core values related to humor, humility, and heart. And we had right to play values of honesty and respect. And we went through and we defined a set of behaviors when the kids were about the age you see in this picture. This was probably about 8-9 years ago. These are behaviors that set the standard for my wife and I and our children about what it meant to exhibit those values. And they start to understand that, and we can come back and reference these. These things give you a language to hold each other accountable. And so I encourage you, you can leverage anything we have here, but create your own. Be creative. This is the foundation. This is what will minimize the degree of hypocrisy. You know, as parents, we always say, you hear the saying, don't do this, don't do as I say, not as I do. Well, let's be consistent, and let's set the example for our children, for our teams, to do as I do, you know, to live our values in a consistent and honorable way. So I'll leave you with just, again, some questions for you to consider as you leave here. What behaviors reinforce your core values? And what are those behaviors? Are they even defined? Are they well known? And related to that, you know, are there different perspectives on those behaviors, and what are those behaviors that contradict those core values and that we must stop? And then lastly, I just challenge you again to think in terms of, you know, in the midst of what we're dealing with is just a tremendous disruption to our work environment. Take another look at your values and behaviors. Again, if your collaboration, if your behavior was to walk the halls on a weekly basis and speak to people, well, obviously that's not going to work right now. So what's the new behavior? What are the new behaviors and rituals? And we'll talk about the rituals next week. So just going back to our GEAR approach, as I mentioned, you can go out and watch this webinar or share it with others if you so feel, and look back at some of the other materials. You can expand upon this. We have blog posts. We have some different brochures and information that enhance what you're seeing here today. There is a worksheet for the application that gives you more guidance. Some of the things I talked about just on the approach of how you can go do this with your team. You don't need any help to do this, but if you do need help to do this, if you want some independent facilitation, I'm happy to help you in that regard. We've done a lot of this work, but if you simply have questions, feel free to email me. You can see the landing page here. An email will come out to you with this landing page for this additional information. And again, I just encourage you to check back in next week. We're going to really get to these prescribed application of behaviors and values through rituals. So with that, I will turn it over again. There you see my book. As I mentioned last week, we cut the price $10. So now's a great time if you are a zombie or know a zombie in the workforce, or you're just struggling with life balance. I would encourage you to check it out. And there's my contact information if you'd like to reach out to me. So with that, let me turn it back over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Steve. And any questions for Steve, you can, we got a small group here, so if you'd like to post it in chat real quick, you're welcome to do that. I didn't see any come in for you, Steve, while you were presenting, but we'll give it a moment here, see if anybody else has a question for you.
No problem. I know we're right up against a half hour
Uh,
trying to keep these
yeah.
on schedule. So yeah, anyone
Okay.
feel
Well, I'm
free
not
to
seeing.
email me directly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thanks to all of you for joining us live. We appreciate it. The journey continues, same time, same place next week. You can sign up for the individual ones or for the whole series. And as Steve mentioned, all of these are being recorded and will be made available up on the CEEK website. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you in future events. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.